Good morning. For those of you who were not here yesterday, I welcome you to Princeton and to the Food Ethics and Environment Conference. I'm Peter Singer from the Centre for Human Values and, of course, also on behalf of Princeton Environmental Institute. We have a very full day today, but it's a very exciting day with a lot of speakers lined up. I'd remind you to turn off your cell phones, of course. Also, I want to let you know that we have a number of authors here who have published books in this area. We have some books on sale in the foyer around to that side, and authors will be available to sign books during the breaks. The breaks are not very long. We have a morning and an afternoon tea break, so we'll get a few books signed there. If you can't find the author you want there, you can look for the author during the day or at the lunch break, and generally they'll be happy to sign the books when they can. To moderate this morning's session, I'm going to call on Rita Hindon. Rita is a researcher in public health and epidemiology from the University of Massachusetts. She's also a Princeton alum, but the real reason why I'm asking her to moderate this session now is that, in a way, she is the inspiration behind the conference that we have put on. In that, a couple of years ago, Rita came to me and said that as a Princeton alum and as someone working in public health, she was interested in exploring what could be done to make Princeton's food supply better, healthier, more environmentally sustainable, and generally more ethical. And as it happened, I was at that stage beginning the work on the book I wrote with Jim Mason, The Way We Eat, and I was very happy to support this idea and also to try and make it both a practical and an educational opportunity, because I think food is a really special case in that there is a lot to be learned about it in a variety of different ways, a variety of different disciplines, and we have those disciplines come together here. Biologists working on environmental issues, people can work in economics, industry, agriculture, business, but also, of course, there's extensive literature about food and agriculture. There are also a lot of ethical questions for philosophers to concern with, questions of political theory about the organisation of it, and I think Eric Schlosser brought out the way in which the extent to which we organise our food supply is part of the way we are structured and organised as a nation as a whole. So it's food offers a great educational opportunity for Princeton students, but also something that is therefore immediately practical. And I think that was the kind of idea that Rita Hindon was urging and was the opportunity that we took up. And it's having more than one spin-off. I don't want to suggest that it just builds up to this conference and that's it, because the whole idea of it is that it's an ongoing practical thing which I hope will not only provide the stimulation that this conference does, but will also lead us all to think about how we can make our own food supply and the food supplies of institutions that we're connected with. And I know many of you are from Princeton, but many of you have come from other institutions as well, how we can work towards those goals. So I want to thank Rita for that inspiration and ask her to moderate this session. Please welcome Rita Hindon.
Thank you. If, as I believe, our food choices provide a significant reflection of our humanity, then the two presenters of today's opening session are exceptionally well suited to remind us of our individual and collective potential. Our first speaker, Marion Nestle, is the Paulette Goddard Professor in the Department of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University. She's a leader and advocate for better nutrition in academia, in government, and in the public media. to which she was department chair at NYU and has published many dozens of articles in peer-reviewed professional journals. She has served as an advisor at both the FDA and the USDA. For example, she was the managing editor of the 1988 Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health. She is the author of several widely acclaimed books addressed to all of us who eat. These are Food Politics, Safe Food, Bacteria Biology, Biotechnology, and Bioterrorism, and most recently, What to Eat. Each is essentially an invitation to us to be informed, and we're fortunate to have her here today to inform us directly and to inspire us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at this wonderful conference in this gorgeous space. My presentation is entitled The Environmental Determinants of Food Choice, and it's going to pick up on a theme that Eric Schlosser dealt with last night. And my starting place for it is a paper written by my old friend Kate Clancy in 1982, in which she asked some fairly serious questions about the food supply, and this was the first time I had ever heard those questions asked. Is it ethical, she asked, to make junk foods and profit from them? Is it ethical to urge people to consume such foods? Is it ethical to market such foods to people who are in no position to evaluate them, such as children? Well, 25 years have gone by, and here's the New Yorker asking the question, which entree raises the fewest ethical issues? Ethical issues in food choice have become mainstream. And so there are further questions that I think we need to ask. Is it ethical for food companies to promote highly processed foods as healthful? Is it ethical for food companies to sponsor self-serving research, to lobby government agencies in their own self-interest, to lobby health professionals in their own corporate interest, and to attack critics of their policies, subject to which I am exceedingly sensitive. Just the asking of these questions, it seems to me, reframes the discussion about food and health in a very different way, and I'm very grateful to Peter Singer for reframing the dialogue. I think these questions are important because the issue that drives my work is public confusion about nutrition and health. This was a Newsweek article from last spring that talked about how confused the public is about what to eat, based on, largely on the exceedingly contradictory research that comes out all of the time. And I think that's too bad because, as Time magazine put it, you don't need to be an Einstein to figure out what to have for dinner. And to me, nothing could be simpler. I think it's just simply a matter of eating less, moving more, making sure you get plenty of fruits and vegetables and not eating too much junk food and enjoying your food. And that really takes care of most of the problems about diet and health. And if they seem more complicated than that, it's surely because of the single public health nutrition issue that drives everything in the field these days, which are the very rapidly rising rates of obesity. I just got the latest report from the Journal of the American Medical Association this morning, and rates of obesity among adults of the United States have increased by 6% just since 1999. And it's not just a cosmetic problem, it's also a problem because of rising rates of the health consequences of obesity. So this drives the field. And there are two ways of dealing with the whole obesity question. The first is to say, okay, if you're fat, it's your fault. And this is what The Economist said a few years ago. Somebody in there said, if people want to eat their way to groceries, it's their fault and their problem, and we shouldn't need to bother about it. And of course, if you think that personal responsibility is what drives eating behavior, then the remedy is simply to educate people. You just tell people the right thing to do and hope that they will do it. And I have public health nutrition students from my class here today, and they know that education is not enough. It doesn't work. The alternative approach is to change the environment. And the New York Times described the environment as the gorge yourself environment a few years ago. More food, more choices, and more eating. And here the remedy is, if you want to improve the way people eat, you change the environment to make it easier for people to make more healthful choices. So the default is a healthy choice rather than the default being what it is now. So I want to talk a little bit about the factors in the environment that research, and more research, demonstrates encourages people to eat more calories, even when they don't want to, even when they're on diets, and even when they know better. The first is variety. It's referred to in the trade as the buffet syndrome. If you go to a buffet and you taste everything that's in there, you're going to consume more calories than you would if the food were less varied. The second, and in many ways the most important, is large portions. This is my former doctoral student, now Dr. Lisa Young, with an indication of her research on cup sizes for soft drinks. The one on the left is an 8-ounce standard Department of Agriculture serving size for a soft drink. It's 8 ounces. You can't even get one anymore. And the others were bought at our local movie theater. The largest contains 64 ounces of drink if it doesn't have too much ice in it, and provides 800 calories worth of soda, and consumed by one person. And the work of Brian Wansink, who's just published a wonderful new book called Mindless Eating, shows that even if you give people food, if you just give people a larger container, they'll consume more calories than they would if the container were smaller. He's very interested in studying environmental cues that trigger overeating, and he can show that people who are given a 4-quart bowl of popcorn will eat almost twice as many calories out of that bowl as they would if it were in a 2-quart bowl, and their estimation of the number of calories that they're eating lags significantly behind the actual number. Another one is ubiquity. There's food everywhere. And I like to ask the question, when did it become okay to eat in bookstores? I can still remember the days when they, made you leave your drinks outside. The closer food is to you, the more you will eat of it, the more frequently you eat, the more calories you will consume. And all of these are determinants of eating behavior, as is low prices. We heard a lot about low prices last night. But the example that I like to give is a very simple one. If you go into McDonald's with $5, you have a choice. You can buy 5 hamburgers or you can buy 1 salad. There's something wrong with that picture. This is not just because of McDonald's clever pricing strategies. This also has to do a lot with federal policies that support the production of some foods rather than others. If it's a policy, policies can be changed. So these are the kinds of things that I talked about in my previous books, Food Politics and Safe Food, which came out in 2002 and 2003. And as I was going around the country talking about those books, people would come up afterwards and say, "Oh, very interesting work, but you didn't tell us what to eat." And I was very surprised by that until I really got into it and started asking them what they meant. And they started telling me how for them supermarkets were ground zero for anxieties about food. Supermarkets, they said, made them anxious. For example, when they went into a supermarket, they saw danger everywhere. When they went into a supermarket, they were overwhelmed by the number of choices. They just didn't know how to make those choices. What they really wished for was that people would just tell them which foods are good for them and which foods are bad for them, and make it simple to make those kinds of choices. So I started going around supermarkets and doing kind of a critical analysis of supermarkets. I learned a lot about them very quickly. This is a map of a store in Ithaca, New York. It's a typical mid-sized supermarket. It could be anywhere in the country, or for that matter, anywhere in the world, because all supermarkets are based on the same research. You come in where the arrow is at the door, you go around the store, and those big aisles are in the middle. And all stores start with produce sections. The produce sections entice you in and are what Michael Pollan calls supermarket pastoral. And I love this photograph, Michael, because it's got a picture of my poster for my book on your desk. So I always like to show this one. Thank you for that. The periphery of supermarkets is set up not only for the convenience of the store, because it's easier to manage the refrigeration and the stocking of the fresh foods from the periphery, but milk is always in the far distant corner, because the object of the game is to get you to do as much walking in the store as possible, because rule number one of supermarkets is that the more products you see, the more you're likely to buy. And let me tell you, this is backed up by very substantial research. Not only the more products, if it's true that the more products you see, the more you buy, then you want to make sure, if you're a food manufacturer, that your product gets seen. And so companies pay supermarkets to put their products in prime real estate at eye level, and at other areas in where people are likely to see them. But where the profits are really made in stores is in the center aisles. And that, of course, is where the junk food is. And by junk food, which is a rude term for highly processed foods that are high in calories, that are rather nutritionally depleted, and that are highly profitable to the store, those are going to be in the center aisles. And one of the things you want to do in the center aisles is put plenty of sugar in the products, sugars, plural, in the products, because if you can easily add value to sugars, which are very cheap, and sell them for a lot more money. And so you see big aisles devoted to candy in supermarkets, and that candy will be at prime real estate at the ends of the aisles and at the cash register. None of that is accidental. But the place where you really want to see food sold is in soft drinks. And I was taken last May by a reporter for the Los Angeles Times to a supermarket in downtown Los Angeles, in an extremely low-income area in downtown LA. And I was stunned by the displays of soft drinks in that store. There were soft drinks in a whole huge aisle, and at the end of one aisle, there was a wall of soft drinks when you came into the store. There was a soft drink display at the terrific real estate end of an aisle. There was soft drinks at the end of another aisle. There were soft drinks available at the end of another aisle. There were soft drinks available in a freestanding display. There were soft drinks at the end of another aisle. And my favorite was that there was this platform of soft drinks on which they were displaying garden furniture. You could not walk out of that store without buying a bottled drink of some kind or another. And the pricing strategies also encourage overeating because it costs much less per ounce to buy soft drinks from a large container, 3 cents or less per ounce, than it does from a small container, more than 10 cents per ounce. And I once asked a conference of supermarket executives, how come the difference was so big? And they said, well, if you want small containers, you should be willing to pay for them. But these pricing strategies encourage people to eat more. And then I haven't even gotten to the issue that, of course, encourages people to eat more than anything, which is advertising. And American food and beverage companies spend about $12 billion a year in total on food and beverage advertising. That's just for direct media, radio, television, print, because it's measurable by advertising age and other industry groups. But then they estimate that in addition to that, there's another $2 spent for every dollar spent on direct media on things like trade shows, coupon campaigns, and point-of-purchase kinds of things. And so the total is somewhere in the order of $36 billion, a number that's far too big for me to comprehend. So I've picked one example of a single product. This is Kellogg's Cheez-Its had a $32 million advertising budget last year, just for direct media, just for one product. I can assure you that this greatly exceeds the total federal expenditure on any kind of healthy eating campaign. Now, rule number 4 is to use health claims to sell products, and I want to make it very clear that I am not against companies selling products. Where I start balking is when they start advertising these products as particularly healthful. Well, here's a product that, isn't a bad, it's a cracker, for heaven's sakes. This product has 10 health claims on it. It says it's heart healthy, it's reduced in fat, it's got whole grain and no trans fats. Oh, that's good. It may reduce the risk of heart disease. It's low in saturated fat and cholesterol. It meets the criteria of the Department of Agriculture's pyramid. It's heart healthy, and it's a weight management tool. Okay. The only thing missing on that was the American Heart Association's endorsement, and the reason why there's no American Heart Association endorsement on this is that Triscuit is owned by Nabisco, Nabisco is owned by Kraft, Kraft is owned by Altria, and Altria owns Philip Morris, and the American Heart Association won't put its logo on products owned by cigarette companies. But it will put its logo on products that are sugary cereals, because it doesn't care about sugar. It only cares about fat in products. And so here's the American Heart Association logo on a frosted cereal in which half the ingredients roughly are added sugars of one kind or another. The other thing that this particular product does is in the upper right-hand corner, it has self-endorsements about its healthful qualities. And I want to say just a few things about these self-endorsements, because all companies are doing this these days. Here's PepsiCo's Smart Choices Made Easy in an advertisement in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association, so that dietitians will promote use of these products among their clients. Kraft does the same thing. It has a Sensible Solution logo, because this is an excellent source of calcium because it has cheese in it, I guess, even though it has 25% of the daily value for saturated fat and sodium and has a full ounce of sugars in it. Not exactly what you might think of as a health food. When a company does independent criteria for evaluating products, as Hannaford Supermarkets did this year, they hired an independent group of nutritionists and scientists to develop a fairly stringent criteria for the healthfulness of products. They discovered to their dismay that 3/4 of the products in their stores didn't qualify for even 1 star. They have a 1, 2, 3-star program depending on how healthful the foods are, and 3/4 of 27,000 products in their stores did not qualify even for 1 star. And almost none of the Sensible Solution and Smart Spot products qualified. Rule number 5 is to target what the industry refers to as LOHAS. I'm guessing that's you. These are people who follow the lifestyle, certainly me. They're people who follow lifestyles of health and sustainability and are likely to look for products that appear healthful in stores. And this is a picture of Safeway's new line of organic foods that just came out last spring. And they have organic carrots and organic milk priced very nicely. And then they also have organic macaroni and cheese, organic frozen burritos, organic fruit-flavored cereal with no fruit in it, and all of the other kinds of things that you expect to see in supermarkets. You know, my feeling about this is an organic junk food is still a junk food. And that's why you have things like organic tortilla chips and my favorite candy, which is classic organic gummy bears, vegan. And so, you know, you can buy healthy candy for your kids. And this brings me to the whole question of marketing to children, and I should say that all of this is legal. Whether it's ethical is something we can argue about, and certainly when it comes to marketing to children, we cross, I think, a very serious ethical line. And it's not just me who says so. In December, the Institute of Medicine, a think tank in Washington, came out with an extraordinary report on marketing foods to children, in which they reviewed 123 studies, did a really serious research job, and in which they described the research enterprise that is devoted to marketing to children, the methods that are used to sell things directly to children, the amount of money that's spent on marketing to children, the sales that result as a result, the effects that marketing to children have on children's requests for products, and the effects on their health. You cannot read this report without coming away from this thinking that business cannot go on as usual. This situation has to change. There are three reasons why companies want to market to children. The first is brand loyalty. Get them hooked early and they'll want those foods for life. The second is referred to in the trade as the pester factor. You want kids to ask their parents or their caretakers to buy these foods for them. And any of you who have young children experience this on a daily basis. But I think the third is the most insidious, and it's the one that troubles me the most. And that is, you want to convince kids that they're supposed to be eating kids' food, kids' cuisine. They're not supposed to be eating the boring adult foods that their parents eat. They're supposed to have their foods like this in special cartoon illustrated packages in funny colors and shapes, so you have these unidentified food objects in there. And this is very effective. Kids are barraged with foods that are made just for them. You take a 2-year-old into a supermarket, and that 2-year-old goes right to the products that are made just for kids foods. And these are interesting foods. Here's a box that is candy that is designed to look like food, and then you have a cereal that's designed to look like candy. So it's very, very confusing for kids to try to figure out. They just think they're supposed to be eating candy all the time. Now, this starts very early. Gerber's now makes a processed finger food for kids that's for, made for children who are just being weaned. These are their first foods. And the companies themselves are getting into an amazing collection of activities to make their products look healthier that are designed for kids. This is a Kraft Sensible Solution macaroni and cheese, just covered with illustrations about how many vitamins and minerals it has in it and how it's made with whole grain. You don't want to read the label on this thing too carefully. Here's my favorite example, brought to me by a student who's here. Thank you, Lauren. And she bought these two boxes on the same day in Manhattan. The box on the left, Fruity Pebbles with 12 grams of sugar and 0 grams of fiber, is the standard product in the line, but they've made a Sensible Solution version of it that has half a teaspoon per serving less of sugars, and that adds 3 grams of polydextrose, an artificial fiber, so that they can advertise this as a good source of fiber. PepsiCo has a product that is made just a snack food that's made just for kids. It's got 0 grams of trans fat. And it has the Smart Spot on it. And I've illustrated the ingredient list because anytime you see an ingredient list this long, you know it's a dead giveaway that this is not something that you would want to feed your kid. Here's a new innovation. Kellogg's has come out with a new breakfast pack for kids who are on the school breakfast program. And this is made so that the schools don't have to do any work for it. And this breakfast contains Frosted Flakes, Pop-Tarts, and apple juice. And the reason for doing it is given in this advertisement. This is in a trade publication. It reduces your labor costs while supporting more participation and more profits. Guess what this is about? I think this is my last example. This is a General Mills cereal. It's with the self-endorsement, 75% less sugar, and it's sweetened with Splenda and artificial sweetener. Whether this is a good idea for feeding kids is something we can debate later, I would say no. Why does everything have to be sweet? I don't know. And then in part of the effort to make foods look healthy, Nickelodeon has licensed its SpongeBob character for carrots. Many people think this is a terrific thing to do because it will encourage children to eat more vegetables. I think it's part of the whole environment of trying to teach kids that they're supposed to be eating kids' food, not real food, and I don't think it's a very good idea. Now, while all of that is going on, here's what's going on behind the scenes. It's very difficult to get information about expenditures on advertisements if you're not part of the industry. But Advertising Age had this graph at the beginning of the year where it demonstrated the minuscule amount of money that PepsiCo is putting into advertising its healthier snack versions and the $20 to $25 million per product for direct media advertising that it's doing for its usual snacks. So business as usual is being supported with heavy dollars, whereas these so-called healthier products are not. And then, of course, behind the scenes, these companies banded together to form an alliance to protect their First Amendment rights to market to children. So we're dealing here with a situation in which marketing to children, which I think is an ethical problem, is being defended using the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's hard for me to believe that that was the intent of the Founding Fathers, but so be it. Now, I haven't said anything so far about the economic issues involved in this. I know that they're going to come up over and over. And the fact that these healthier foods are only affordable by people who can afford them, and that, in fact, we have a two-class food system in our society as we have a two-class system in many other ways. And that's something that you need to keep in mind while we're discussing the ethical issues. And I say that because I think food is a new social movement. As I go around talking to people, I'm astounded by the way food has become a trigger point and a flashpoint for people's concerns about the kind of society that they want to live in. And this social movement, I think, is taking many forms in many different ways. It's still quite disorganized. But I think everybody is moving in the same direction. We have, for example, one senator who is very interested in doing something about food marketing to children and introduced a bill last year and again this year in which he makes the parallel between the way food is marketed to children and the way cigarettes are marketed to children. The organic movement, with all of its flaws, is still, I think, an important step in trying to reach a better food future. And I like this because it's illustrated in movement terms. What do we want? 100% organic feed. When do we want it? Now. It sounds like rallies I used to go to. The organics are succeeding in many ways. They're the fastest growing segment of the food industry. In fact, they're the only growing segment of the food industry. And as I say, for all of their complications, which you'll hear about more, I think it's still overall a positive trend. The kinds of things that Peter Singer has been talking about for years, the way in which animals are raised, I think has moved way beyond animal rights and has moved into the mainstream in ways that are quite, I think, dramatic. The Union of Concerned Scientists published a report last year written by Kate Clancy, the woman whose work I started this talk with, on how grass-fed beef and milk are healthier for people. Center for Science in the Public Interest, which has not historically been involved in anything having to do with animal raising, has a new report out on greener diets in which much of the report is devoted to the way in which industrial animals are raised. So I think this is another area in which there's a trend towards movement. The whole farm-to-community movement, which is just extraordinary. The focus on locally grown, which we'll hear about next, sustainable community-supported agriculture, and the enormous growth of farmers' markets in cities all over the country seems to me to be part of this movement. And then, of course, what's happening in schools, where schools turn out to be the place where individuals can make an enormous difference if they're lucky and if they can get enough other people involved. And so we're seeing a trend towards getting rid of the soda machines and moving into something. This is a picture from Yale's Alice Waters period, where they're growing vegetables and serving terrific food in dormitories. What a concept. I went to a conference last year at Kenyon College, where I know there are people here who were at that conference, and the Kenyon dining room features locally grown food. They're in the middle of Ohio, and it's hard to imagine how they can do that, but they're doing that. And so this trend, it seems to me, is getting there really in a very important way, and I know that there's going to be a lot of talk about this later. In New York City, a private school, the Calhoun School, I think has a model program on how to feed children. It has an extremely charismatic chef, Chef Bobo, who thinks that kids should learn how to taste real food, serves nothing but real food, and has kids who are demanding cooking lessons, are complaining to their parents that the food in school is better than what they get at home, and are demanding and are asking questions about the kinds of ethnic diets that their classmates eat, and are asking if they can work in the kitchen. It's the most extraordinary place I've ever seen. It's just amazing. Okay, it's a private school. You have to start somewhere. But even in New York City, which has 1,200 schools and formidable logistic problems and some of the most difficult and poor students you could ever imagine anywhere, has hired a chef to try to do something about the New York City school meals, and he is going around school by school, one by one, and trying to make changes. And I was taken to a couple of schools in one of the poorest areas of Brooklyn, and I saw teenage boys eating salads with my very own eyes. It was a deeply moving experience. So there are two approaches that I think people can take in this. I think, by all means, exercise personal responsibility. And here's how I suggest people do it in supermarkets. Shop the perimeter, never set foot in the center aisles. If you do, if you're forced to, never buy anything with more than 5 ingredients, with the ingredients you can't pronounce. I never buy anything with artificial anything in it. I don't buy anything with health claims because I think they're misleading. And you don't want to buy things with cartoons on the package because you want to discourage manufacturers from marketing directly to your kids. And if you don't want kids eating junk food, you just don't have it in the house. The alternative, taking personal responsibility a step further, is to do the vote with your fork kind of thing. And here you have to get involved in politics. Yes, you have to educate. People need to know more. But education is never sufficient for behavior change. If you really want to affect behavior change, you have to change policy. And that means getting involved in politics. And so you want to look for ways in which the political system can help you support making ethical choices, can help discourage making unethical choices, and can overall help to improve the food environment. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to share this with you this morning. Thank you very much. Can I sit here?
Thank you very, very much. Wonderful. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Gary Nabhan. He's director of the Center for Sustainable Environments at Northern Arizona University. He received a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship back in 1990 and is the author of Coming Home to Eat. As a multilingual conservation and ethnobiologist, who is often in the field, and in his case, that's often a desert, he is a consummate boundary crosser and bridge builder. His work with Native communities for more than a quarter of a century serves to simultaneously preserve and promote traditional knowledge, improve health by reviving indigenous food cultures, and restore local agricultural landscapes. He's a prolific and lyrical writer. Another of his recent books, Why Some Like It Hot, tells a great and learned story of the co-evolution of communities and their native foods. A major initiative he recently founded and leads is RAFT, Renewing America's Food Traditions. In a personal statement on his website, he writes, I tried to gain more than half of all my foods from local sources, raising heirloom vegetables, field crops, and fruit, raising Navajo churro sheep, black Spanish turkeys, and res dogs, and gathering wild plant foods. It's a pleasure to welcome Gary.
I'm grateful to be with you this morning, and Grateful to the organizers of this wonderful exchange that is bringing so many different strands together that will hopefully benefit our food system and our health. At this moment in time, about 40% of all solar energy that's captured in terrestrial vegetation on this earth is shunted into feeding just one species, our species. And if that did not pose enough of a bioethical dilemma that nearly half of the world's photosynthetic activity is now being used to gorge our species at the expense of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other animals as well as plants on this planet. We have aggravated that situation by not only using solar energy to grow and transport that food, but also are sequestering more and more of the world's fossil fuel reserves to grow that food and move it around. 1 in every 25 calories used in the United States from fossil fuel is now used to ship our food or to prepare it for shipping in terms of providing adequate cooling or packaging to transport food long distances. 1 in every 25 calories of fossil fuel in this country. So our current food system is dependent on the kind of dirty work that our government is doing in the Persian Gulf and in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and other places until we decide that we don't need to transport food like that and we don't need to grow it the way we're currently growing it. And my talk, to some extent, is about that. And I'm going to start off with some elements of the energetics of our food system, but I want to say right off that I'm not suggesting energetics as a substitute for looking at all the ethical issues. I think it's a quick indicator of how much impact our food system is having on the planet and on environmental health and human health. But I really think what we need to move toward is sort of a multivalent ethics of food choices that takes into account these factors that I've listed here, as well as several other ones that the other speakers have brought up, that this is a complex field with many ethical considerations that need to be integrated rather than treated in isolation. And just really want to say that from the start. As I said in my first comment, our current food system is more coal and petrol than soul or the soul of the farmer anymore. On the average, 10 calories of fossil fuel are used to produce, process, transport, and prepare each calorie of food consumed in the United States. And we use more kilocalories in food production, processing, and distribution for the United States than all of the fossil fuel use in Asia and Africa combined for all purposes. So to some extent, this is another story of the wealth of the world being shunted into one society at the expense of others, just like we're shunting the planet's biodiversity into one species at the expense of all others. And the part I'd like to focus on is, of this dilemma that I'd like to focus on, is the fact that our food system is being taken for a ride that it need not necessarily go on. that 16 to 24%, depending on the estimates and how they were made and at what point in time they were made, 16 to 24% of all the energy consumed in the United States is tied up in the food system, and about a fourth or fifth of that is tied up in this transportation system. So we have some food production systems that kind of run like an energy deficit to begin with, producing 1 calorie of strawberries, for example, industrially, using 3 calories to produce it. And if that weren't bad enough, now we ship so-called organic strawberries from Chile in the middle of the winter, 6,000 miles, as if something traveling that far that's produced at an energy deficit should be bought simply because it has that organic label on it. It seems like, to me, a wonderful new absurdity in our food system to think that labeling something organic from 6,000 miles away that is at huge energetic and ecological cost is still worth buying. This is a picture of a friend of mine, 89-year-old Victor Messiasva Jr. His sons and daughters were my teachers of Native American languages. And he's one of the few farmers I know in the United States that still produces corn on a solar energy, rainwater basis without any fossil fuels or fossil groundwater, as a matter of fact. And he admitted to us a few years ago that he was getting tired and that he was going to retire from ranching and get rid of his sheep so that he could devote full-time to farming. This is a guy in his late 80s that is still out there in the fields every day. But his kind of farming is so different than most corn grown in the United States because it is not soaked in oil, as Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma shows. The kind of corn that we're getting from the Midwest is now a very different beast than what we're talking about here. And the fact that driving a can of corn home from the grocery store and preparing it uses more calories than are now used in growing it is just one more step in that absurdity. So there are various estimates on how far our food travels, and most of them we think are underestimates in that we can track these well from where they get into the U.S. food system and their in terms of their redistribution point, Los Angeles or New York City or Denver, Colorado or Chicago. But we really don't know how many miles that food has traveled before it hits that redistribution point where we can track it. But it's an enormous amount of fuel, and we'll probably hear more about this in the afternoon. But if we look at locally accessed ingredients in one meal and those imported ingredients in another meal, there's 650 times the amount of carbon emissions generated by that imported meal than in the local meal. And this means that single factor alone of transporting food, particularly when it doesn't need to be transported for some reasons I'll get into later, is one of the easiest things I think we can solve in this absurd food system that we're participating in consciously or unconsciously these days. At the bottom line for me is that Americans crave the exotic in something that borders on the bizarre, that now we have so-called health food drinks that have herbs from 5 continents in a single bottle. Now, those herbs may make up 0.0004% of the total contents of that bottle, but we feel that we're getting the healthful herbs of 5 continents all packaged for us in one thing. So most health food stores are just as globalized, if not more globalized, than the average Safeway or Albertsons or Kroger's. And I think it's in part because of this craving that it's the exotic that is going to make us healthy. So for the first time in history, we import more food from foreign lands than we eat from our own soil. And there's a tragedy in there in that every other country envies the combination of great soil, available water, and fairly moderate climate that the United States has. Angelo Pellegrini, one of the great food writers of the last century, who came from a very poor family in Italy, said most immigrants, when they come to the United States, just simply can't imagine how any single place on earth can have the abundance of resources to grow food as easily as we can in this country, and yet we're exporting more food now than we grow of our own, or importing more food now than we grow of our own. And the volume of vegetables imported to the U.S. from distant lands has more than tripled since 1970, and that's the least of it. Beverages, grains, etc., are moved around much more than fresh vegetables. So what that means is that we have a distance with our food unlike anything that humankind has experienced over our 2.5 million years of evolution. When literally kids answer the question about where our food comes from by saying the grocery store, we realize that where food does come from is simply in an abstraction. That being an abstraction means that we don't really have to invest any care or concern about the health or the survival of food-producing land in the United States, because we're basically buying into the outsourcing mentality that America's food supply can be outsourced if labor is cheaper in other continents, and whatever the workers' conditions there are on those other continents is sort of out of sight, out of mind, so why worry about it? And that comes at expense of both the quality of our food and the land that once fed us that we may need to feed us in the future again. And so these are just a series of slides, the next 4 that I'm going to go through very rapidly twice, to just show you how rapidly the loss of some of the best farmland in the United States is occurring. These are 4 snapshots of land use in the Metro Phoenix area, about 200 miles south of where I live. I raise sheep and turkeys up by the Grand Canyon. And watch the shrinking of the green and the growing of the yellow. I'll run through this twice. 1934, 1955, 1975, 1995. Let's do that again. 34, 55, 75, 95. And the decisions about how to use that land and the water that formerly irrigated that land is not being decided by consumers, by farmers, or even by elected officials. That's the interesting thing. The Salt River Project and Central Arizona projects that are sort of quasi-governmental corporations have decided that the water in that valley should go to the highest bidders, which are the highest uses. I always love that term, which are fountains in front of resort hotels and things like that. And they've determined that everything within the Metro Phoenix Beltway, all the agriculture in that area should be phased out by 2015. So it's not voters, consumers, farmers, or elected officials deciding that. It's a quasi-governmental corporation. And the irony is that in the very same state, 70% of Arizona consumers claim that they'll pay more for locally produced foods if they can access more of it. 90% say that they would prefer to buy a locally produced food over the same commodity imported from another state or another country. And again, local food is not about one issue, and there's many reasons why people prefer it, as you can see in this survey that we did in Arizona. But let me talk for a second about some cautions that people have, including some that Peter has in his book with Jim about local foods, that we still may have hydroponic tomatoes in the local marketplace. We still may have animals that are not treated humanely, or we may have foods with a high amount of pesticides embedded in them. I see those in most of the farmers markets that I have gone to in this country, which is one of the main means that locally produced food is being accessed in its own community, as minor risks. I do not see the CEO of ConAgra out there on Saturday mornings trying to sell me a rubber chicken. I also do not see much veal. I occasionally see hydroponic tomatoes, but the fastest growing part of the tomato industry is truck farmed heirloom tomatoes with incredibly different qualities than the tomatoes that grow well under hydroponics. And so we have incredibly wide-ranging prices among the tomatoes in our own farmers markets, because some are heirloom, some are organic and heirloom, but we're essentially getting the same differentiation of tomatoes as we saw 20 years ago with the beginnings of the microbreweries. People used to think a tomato was one thing. Now we know it's multiple things, and I think we're gaining something from that diversity. The other thing I should say is that our studies of the prices for local foods in farmers markets like this one shows that the prices of tomatoes and zucchinis and other things seasonally dip below those prices in chain grocery stores. They're nowhere near the prices that you pay for as organic foods in health food stores. So farmers markets, many of which now use or accept food stamps and other program coverage for elderly and pregnant women, the WIC program and all of that, are not out of the price range of local consumers of low income. In fact, because the farmers are getting more of the consumer dollar, and there's not several intermediaries between them and the consumer, the prices are often quite low. So we see 4 or 5 main reasons that people opt for purchasing local food. The traceability is becoming an increasing issue, and I think that's one of the interesting wrinkles about the safe food issues that Marion Nestle talks about in her book. People are still anxious about the idea that an ear tag, an identification tag on every cow or bull in this country is going to solve our food safety issues. They are looking for human contact. They want to go back to a rancher or a hog farmer and say, "You SOB, I got sick over the meat you sold me." They don't care about the tagging system. That is a false sense of assurance to most people. After the mad cow disease, we realized that it took I think, 15 days for that contaminated meat to get out to 6 states and a couple U.S. territories in the Pacific, and it took 30 days to figure out how that meat got out there that quickly. Okay, and the same thing was true with so-called natural selection spinach a couple months ago. The traceability that people want is having a human face, an address, and a connection to people to go with it. I'm going to talk about the sticky money issue, not just multiplier effects that your community benefits from, but all kinds of other ways that locally accessible food helps communities in a second. But let me just say that people are skeptical of the number of intermediaries that food passes through, and that they sense that obscures both the quality of the food and its safety these days. And so we're now finding counties doing posters like this. It sort of amazes me that now, rather than food safety and food ethics being a liberal Democrat issue, it's also an issue that I hear the right-wing Republicans and libertarians in Arizona talk about. And even though we sort of had a dismal election in terms of bond issues against immigrants, against protecting open space in Arizona, they did vote against factory farmed hogs. And it seems to me that the food issues relating to food security are now bipartisan. The main thing that my recent studies have been on is how much of direct marketing of locally produced food returns to farmers and to communities themselves. And over the last 7 years, we didn't have a farmer's market, we didn't have a CSA, we didn't have a local food restaurant. 0.05% of the food produced in our county was eaten locally. Now we've radically changed that, and there's been about a 20-fold increase in the amount of locally produced food purchased in our community, and a whole set of new restaurants, new mechanisms to get that food out to people. And what we're finding out is that ranchers and farmers who felt that they were up against a wall with environmental regulations, who for the last 20 years have blamed environmentalists for their lack of profit margin, and the environmentalists have blamed them for bringing more of their land under the plow, having less hedgerows, woodlots, shelter belts. Now those farmers are saying that if they're getting 65% of every consumer dollar of their food rather than 8 or 10%, they have money to reinvest in the land. That the intermediaries, not the environmentalists, were what put them up against the wall. Again, we're doing some very simple kinds of documentation to remind our city fathers and county commissioners why they need to invest in farmers markets and local processing plants. That it's less pollution, less fossil fuel use, more gain to the local community and multiplier effects, certainly less fossil fuel use. It's going down at our farmers market as there's an incentive for more home gardeners to scale up and do truck gardening in our community, or to do processing of their vegetables and fruits into salsas and chutneys and things like that. And so this is actually improving year by year in our community. And an interesting thing is that we have doubled in the last 6 years the number of species and varieties of food in our local economy, fresh foods, sourcing it, comparing what's in grocery stores, health food stores, farmers markets, CSAs, and we have the first community-supported wild foraging project in the country that's like a CSA. And so where I disagree with Marion is that there is a kind of variety that's good out there, and that's the real authentic diversity of different vegetables and fruits that are available to people that I think is a much more important factor than just talking about the relative ratios of macronutrients, fat, protein, and sugar that are in our diet. Those micronutrients and secondary compounds are a neglected part of our health that this dietary diversity brings back to us. I also think that there's a big effort now to deepen what we mean by local, to see mesclun greens all produced from the same seed company in Southern California, then almost franchised and sold in farmers markets across the country, to me is not local. I mean, yes, they were locally grown and you can get them in your community, but I want to know where the inputs from that production comes from. Is it using local manure and local compost on the soil? Is it using local water? Is it using local seeds? Is it linked to the regional heritage, food heritage of the region? Is it reinforcing our cultural identity? And so I'd like to leave you with not ethics or energetics, but with poetics. And I think what we need to do is remember that these local foods inspire us, link us to place, and link us to community more than those packaged foods could ever dream of doing. Sit down at the table with your countrymen and friends and ask your lips, tongues, minds, and bellies some questions. Questions that remind us that our bodies and spirits are either nurtured by place or swallowed up by tasteless placelessness. Ask aloud, just what exactly is it that we want to have cross our lips, to roll off our tongues and down our throats, to be transformed and conjured into something altogether new by thousands of gut microbes, and to be lodged in the very cells of our own bodies? Just what do we want to be made of? What do we claim as our tastes? And what do we want to taste like when we, in our own turn, are eaten by vulture, raven, coyote, condor, detritivore, or bear? I, for one, and perhaps you as well, wish to taste like the very country in which I reside, like Great Plains bison wallowing amidst prairie turnips, like salmon running up a cold and clear mountain stream, like gators crawling into a swamp stewing like gumbo with sassafras leaves, like wild rice hand-harvested from the azure waters of a northern lake, like maple syrup flowing from some woods that Robert Frost once knew, like cactus falling off a tall saguaro and being caught in a handmade basket below. These plants and these animals are asking us to pledge allegiance to what is local, to what is loved, to what is seasonal, and what is unique to each American place. If old Walt Whitman were sitting at our table, supping with us today, he'd be celebrating that wild old Slumgullion stew that all of us together make, singing a song that goes like this: taste America's uniqueness, taste this earth, taste our terroir, savor its worth, and by tasting it, you will see. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. I would ask both of the presenters to come up to stage and we'll take questions. I think there's a question over here.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for two very nice presentations. So I just wanted to challenge something Professor Nestle said. early in her talk, which was that the ubiquity of food is a problem. And I kind of want to tie us into Gary Nabhan's presentation as well, because I was recently in Italy, and they have food everywhere. I mean, there's ubiquitous food there. And I think they do very well because they don't have an obesity problem, things like that, at least as far as I could see, because they do well on the other points that you raised, like they have low sugar, high vegetable content, and they have tremendous local and regional pride in their food. I think that the pride in their local food sort of is the source of their cultural healthiness. So just wanted to see what you thought about that, and if you really still think that ubiquity of food is a problem.
Oh, I tend to exaggerate. No, obviously, if it's ubiquitous great food and it's eaten in reasonable calories, then it's going to be fine. But that's not what, that wasn't the point I was making.
Yeah, thanks. In the way back.
Thank you. I wonder if, Marion, you could elaborate on, because I think it'll come up later when we have a representative from McDonald's, why exactly is it unethical to advertise to, let's just say, children under 12? And could you comment on the recent voluntary guidelines that were reported on 2 days ago in the New York Times, where a number of big food processing corporations, including McDonald's, have said they will do something different to half of children under 12. Mm-hmm. And for Gary, you mentioned the problems in land utilization linked to highest use. Is that definition akin to what I'm more familiar with, which is so-called highest and best use? And are people exploring the possibility of defining best use in ways that would better serve the goals that are, I think, implicit in your presentation?
Marketing to children, there's a fair amount of research that has looked at children's understanding of commercial as opposed to educational messages. And there's some argument about where the cut point is. But children under the age of whatever the cut point is are not able to distinguish advertising from education or the purpose of advertising. And so they're not really in a position to make informed choices about what its significance is. And there's some evidence that that difficulty extends through high school, but the cut point is usually 8 or 9 or 10 or someplace in there that's used. So that means if you're trying to sell something to a 2-year-old, that 2-year-old is not in a position to evaluate it. It's nothing more complicated than that. The new CARO guidelines. I was traveling in Europe this week, and they were sent to me by a reporter. And I just read them and said, well, they're voluntary, and voluntary has never worked in this industry. And there are lots and lots and lots of loopholes. I read it as an admission by the companies that they know they're doing wrong and are trying to fix that in whatever way that they can do. And usually when I give these kinds of talks, I talk a lot about the difficulties that companies have in maintaining their bottom line in today's food economy. And I'll just do this very, very quickly. There are 3,900 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in the country available in the food supply that's roughly twice what anybody needs. And companies are required by our shareholder value system to grow every quarter. So if you're a food company, you're in an impossible position. You not only have to make profit every year, but you have to increase your profits every quarter because your company's health depends on Wall Street's analysis of your ability to meet your growth targets, and you're trying to do that in a situation in which there's already too much food. So I see what's going on in the food industry in general with respect to kids as desperation to keep vending machines in schools. They will do anything to keep the vending machines in schools because if you have vending machines, people are going to buy from them. And anything to keep regulators away, critics away, and anybody who might in some way curb the ability to market to children. It's a vitally important part of corporate health. So that's what. So I see that as being part of that situation.
With regard to the highest and best use question, I think that's ultimately what I'm talking about, redefining terms like that and looking at how we use all water and fossil fuels in this country and in this world in a new light. When we ask Arizonans in Harris poll type surveys of randomized residents in every zip code in our state, if they would be willing to put aside a certain part of the state's water budget to ensure food security, 75% of the people in the state are in favor of doing that immediately. But the current way our water decisions are made is first, all the water is subsidized. No one's paying for the real cost of the water, but it's the highest and best use is always urban and recreational. So every legal decision in Arizona over the last 50 years has limited water to agriculture, even though agriculture's gotten about twice as efficient in its water use since the 1950s, and shunted the water removed from agriculture into urban growth, which ultimately feeds itself. We have 20,000 more people moving into the Phoenix area every year that negate any water savings by the people that already live there. So my point is that we have to completely redefine highest and best use, not only for water, fossil fuel, but for other things as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Was there a question, a couple of rows in front? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Marion. Marion, my question is in regards to the food guide pyramid, and I'm concerned about the health of it. How do you recommend changing that? I'm an educator, and I completely disagree with it.
The question was about the food guide pyramid. Don't use it, for one thing. That would be the first place. Use the old one. The old one was hierarchical and showed that it was better to eat fruits, vegetables, and grains than foods from higher up on the pyramid. And yeah, it had problems, but at least it had food on it. The new one doesn't even have any food on it. And it was a completely politicized process, and it's the Department of Agriculture's food guide. You have to have a computer to use it. You need to go on and log on, and if you've never done it, it's a very interesting experience. Well, every 5 years the dietary guidelines get revised, and there'll be another opportunity to go at it again in 2010. But I'd use the old one.
I should say that with the Wild Farm Alliance, a great organization that's based in California, we did a wild farm food pyramid that just reminds people all the species and lives that are embedded in our food system, from farm workers to pollinators to soil microbes, to think about that whole idea of where our food comes from in a more ecological way.
We want to see that.
Other questions? Take some questions over here, and then maybe we'll try to go to the balcony. Okay. Is there somebody with a mic in the balcony?
There's somebody right here.
Okay.
Now that we see that organic foods have been co-opted by the government and by large corporations buying out all of these firms, the question is, do we see a new march toward local organic as a movement? And how, if so, how do we prevent that, too, from being co-opted?
And how do we empower it, hopefully?
I think that the food movement that is a social movement is beyond being co-opted in the long run. The percentage of the food chains that Walmart is going to leverage with its organic food is still relatively small compared to what everything else is going on positively. But the rest of that movement is going back to a diffuse set of producers and distributors. So we don't see its growth rate relative to Walmart because it's not going back to just one corporate headquarters. I think the beyond organic or organic and beyond movement is the way to go, to say let's keep organic as a cornerstone of what we think of as healthy food, but add elements to it. Fair workers' wages, reduced distribution chains, value chains, whatever you want to call it, so that there's less of a distance between producer and consumer, and that we need to stay vigilant about diluted down definitions of these things, but we have to keep on pushing the standards higher. And I think spending much time on worrying about who's co-opting us is not where our energy should lie, but in advancing a more cohesive view, integrated view of what healthy food is.
Can I comment on that too? I agree completely. When I was writing What to Eat, that was one of the big questions that came up was, could you trust organics? And to my great surprise, the answer turned out to be yes, with some limitations on it. But everybody that I talked to who was involved in growing organic food, producing organic food, inspecting organic food, regulating organic food, said that everybody who was growing organic food, or pretty much everybody, was really trying to do it right. And the pressures I worry a lot about the pressures on it from the large corporations, but I'm also worried about the pressures on it that are trying to make it better. I don't think you drag it down and destroy it in order to make it better. You do exactly what Gary suggested, which is you try to push it in the direction of closing the loopholes and making it a stronger system.
Yeah, and I think we've all said so far, organic alone is not a panacea. Local alone is not a panacea. There will be people that manipulate these terms, but there's a lot of good effort in linking these things rather than dealing with them as isolated values.
Yeah. Questions? Okay, here. You. The fellow right here. Thank you.
To both of you, have you ever considered advocating certification for people who are growing food so they know how to prepare the soil and maintain the soil? People who create food for marketing, for product retail, and for people who run restaurants so that we can be assured that the same way that we know that an accountant is certified with a CPA, that people who are in the food chain are actually certified? What do you think about that?
What I've seen is that there's a lot of growers who use organic methods and who know how to do soil preparation that aren't certified organic now. And then in our polls in Arizona, people want the traceability, the human face, the local, and to know that it's environmentally friendly by seeing with their own eyes that it's environmentally friendly, because they can go to the farms and ranches nearby, and they don't give a shit about whether it's certified organic or not. I'm not a big advocate of turning over to the government certification of every part of our lives.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hi. I've recently finished both the Coming Home to Eat and The Way We Eat by Peter Singer. And I think, although I learned an incredible amount from both of the books, I think the concerns that Peter Singer raised in his book about specifically local food are slightly more in-depth than the ones you addressed in your talk. I think he brought up the point that individual travel miles to farmers markets where you have to go to a bunch of different places to get your food can actually add up to more fossil fuel use than importing foods from far away, and also why it is inherently more ethical to support your local community than other communities in the world that might possibly be more advantaged by your spending dollar, even if they're getting a smaller percentage of it. And I just wanted you to address those topics.
Yeah, I agree with all the cautions that Peter brought up, that local is not a panacea, and yet I think local is a large component of what we need to do. What the Native American communities in our area are saying is not that they want to go all local, but they want fair trade with other native producers, so that dried salmon comes into our area from northwestern fishermen and wild rice from Winona LeDuc's project in exchange for their beans and legumes and chilies that grow well in the Southwest. So they're thinking about fair trade as a community-to-community thing, whether it's international or cross regions. And so I've never been an all local guy. I just think we need to push the balance back toward that, and that fair trade is the other thing. We can also say some things like, it's pretty damn absurd that coffee is the most traveled product and traded product in the world. Do we really all need to get a buzz of coffee from Starbucks in the morning? So fair trade coffee isn't that much of interest to me. I think it's just one more diversion from thinking about what we really need. Is the thing that we need every morning is just a buzz from another country, whether it's fair trade or not, or can we get on without that?
Thank you.
I hear some people saying they need that buzz. Okay.
Oh.
Hi. So over the course of the talk yesterday and the talks today, I've heard some issues, the things that are wrong with the food system, such as health implications of it and marketing, stocking of grocery stores, fossil fuel expenditures, loss of ag land, and the monopoly-like control of food as commodity. And largely the solutions we've been given have been those of personal choice. And I'm from Houston, Texas, and the personal choice option is like farmers markets and CSAs simply don't exist. And if they do, it's certainly not enough to nourish 5 million people. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Houston was recently crowned as the most obese city in the nation. So I would like to hear possibly systemic solutions that you might have in mind, specifically for places that don't necessarily have that local option.
Or how to create that option more substantially.
Yeah, I think you create options. I think it's perfectly possible to go to any supermarket in the United States and eat a healthful diet from it. There are frozen foods that have one ingredient on the package, and that seem to me to be very underrated as a source of fruits and vegetables. There are other choices that can be made on the personal responsibility side that make it, I think, perfectly possible to eat well from existing supermarkets. But that isn't really what this is about. This is about trying to create the same kinds of opportunities for everybody in the country that people in cities have. I mean, you could move to Austin. That would be one possibility.
Just don't commute.
But I think these things have political solutions, and there are opportunities for organizing. I would start with the schools. I bet there's plenty to do in the local schools, and that would be a really great place to start. Go in and take a look at what the kids are eating and see if you can make it better.
I'm going to do a sideways take on your question and bring back something that Marion and Peter said, and said it so quickly that I don't know if it's sunk in with everyone, but eating less is something that we can do in every place. And this American society by and large, and I don't want to subsume everyone as saying all Americans have the same value, but it is the society that fasts less in the history of the world than any other culture. When I talked to the people from Crete in the villages where the Mediterranean diet began, they said, you know what, if you Americans eat the Mediterranean diet and you have it every day, you're still not going to get the same health status that we have, because we fast partially or wholly 180 to 210 days a year. American society is so secular that the spiritual fasting traditions that are in nearly every other culture and faith around the world are ignored here, even though we have devout Jewish, Islamic, Christian people. How did we get so secular that we've thrown fasting out and eating less as an ethical response to the world and a spiritual response to the world out of our entire system? And so I hope we come back to the whole notion of eating less.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you guys are doing in this conference. It's fabulous, and I'm at an organization in Boston called the Food Project, and we're also working on these issues. And one thing that we're really thinking about right now is the Farm Bill, and I'm surprised that no one has mentioned that yet, because that's one way to affect huge systemic change. And so I wanted to ask you both, what are your priorities if you are working on the Farm Bill and issues within it? And how I'm assuming those will affect your work. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm really glad you raised that. The Farm Bill comes up for renewal in 2007, and there are groups all over the country who are working on trying to bring health issues into agriculture issues. The Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy in Minneapolis has published a really terrific report on how farm policy affects obesity. That's a very nice starting place. And there are lots of people looking at whether the Farm Bill can do something to promote local agriculture, to promote organics, and to promote healthier products and change the subsidy system in some way so that there isn't so much emphasis on animal feed and corn and soybeans that become the basis of so many processed food products.
Yeah, I'm on the Community Food Security Coalition board. They're one of the many groups spending time with it. And again, I think what we need is a real overhaul to make that department the Secretary of Food, Land, and Agriculture, or something again to relink the goals of agriculture back to healthy land and healthy people. And so a lot of the folks I know are working on making sure that the programs that are dealing with subsidies are subsidizing the right kind of agriculture and land management rather than the worst of it, where we're giving soybean farmers $300,000 to $600,000 of farm subsidies for growing GMO soybeans, or for not growing it some years, rather than taking care of their land in a more comprehensive way. So I think we need to work both on the land, the productive land conservation issues and the health issues, and reaffirm those as the primary goals of the USDA.
Can I ask the speakers, how hopeful are you that there will be substantial change in the upcoming Farm Bill?
Well, we still have government, don't we? I think it's worth working on. And, change sometimes comes slowly, but it's not going to happen if people aren't working on it. And I think this is a great opportunity for grassroots political action about something that really matters. And if it doesn't work this time, maybe it'll work next time. But there it is. And if nobody does anything about it, it's going to be business as usual.
Fair enough. Let's see. Okay. Right here. And then there.
Yes. Very good presentation. I appreciate this whole dimension that you're bringing into it. One thing occurs to me, though, there probably are some regionally important things like where there's more water and there isn't. And you bringing up the dimension of water seemed very important. We're still draining down that huge aquifer that I can't pronounce the name of in the middle of the country. Ogallala, right. We're so used to having a lot of water here. We're in the part of the country where it just rains and rains and rains. And half the country, that's not true. And to some extent, it seems to me if we're going to move towards pasturage with animals and away from the corn and soy, those areas are going to tend to be more pasture. And the places with a lot of water are going to be the more water-intensive things, and I want to eat both.
I think you're right on target that we need to see some bioregionalism really take hold and have some regional food systems that, as Henry David Thoreau said, meet the expectations of the land right there in the region, and so that we might have different ratios of production of livestock versus vegetable crops in each of these regions wouldn't surprise me, and rather than trying to have that McDonald-oriented one taste, one kind of farm sort of thing. So thanks for bringing that point up.
Yeah, maybe this will...
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very nice that you could come and have these talks here. Being a professor of nutrition and food science, I have a question on the organic foods that you discussed. I understand that the organic foods are healthier because we are using less or non-synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and so forth. But I don't understand whether anybody can tell us about the nutritional value of organic food versus conventional food, and the price that we have to also pay for organic food versus conventional. And the reason for the price I'm bringing in, that the turnover of some of this organic food is less, and as a matter of fact, the nutritional quality may decline because it's not bought as frequently. So if any suggestion, recommendation, comments would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are many critics of organics, and they have a long list of issues that they raise about what's wrong with organics, with the price driving everybody, I think, to try to look at it very critically because organics cost more, I think because they cost more to produce. The organic research organizations and the organic trade associations would love beyond belief to be able to prove that organics are healthier and more nutritious than non-organic foods. I think this is very difficult science to do. These are hard studies to do. There have been a few studies. All of the studies point in the same direction, which is that foods that are grown on healthier soils and richer soils have more nutrients. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Are the differences large? No. Are the differences significant? Probably not. Are Americans suffering from nutritional deficiencies on average? No. So it's very, very difficult to do this, even if they did turn out to have more nutrients in them, which they seem to be. Would it make any difference to health? That's also very difficult science to prove. It's intuitively obvious that healthier foods are better for you, but the science just isn't there.
Can we take, let's see, we'll have 1, 2, 3 and quick comments, and that'll be it. Okay, the question in the back there, and then these two. And maybe ask all 3 questions, and you can respond, the panelists can respond with final comments.
Yes, I have a question about advertising to children. And the 2-year-old doesn't hop in the car, have a wallet full of money, and buy the food. Where's our responsibility as parents? You know, do we not know how to say no? Where's our thinking? Why do we let the corporations do our thinking for us?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's the You know, I talk to parents. My kids are grown, and I don't have small children anymore. And my children were raised in an era that was much quieter. They weren't marketed to nearly the same extent that they are today. People who have children, people that I know who have children in 2 litters, you know, they have very young children, and then there was a second marriage years later, and then they have another set of children, say it's much, much harder now. That the extent of the advertising is so much greater and so much not only in volume but in sophistication. I've just done a study with some students on how foods are marketed to children, and you just wouldn't believe what goes on the internet. If you have a child who's online, you just cannot believe the extent of food advertising that's there. So yes, parents need to say no, but it's become increasingly difficult to do that. First, parents have to recognize how their kids are being marketed to. Then they have to be willing to teach their kids critical thinking about foods and critical thinking about advertising. And unless you're willing to dig in and do that, it's just all too easy to just say, okay, sure, I'll buy it. It's only one food.
Okay. Yeah, I think the other thing there is that even conscientious parents are dismayed that the kids are getting this advertisement in schools when Pizza Hut and McDonald's can have franchises in your schools and their pop machines in your schools. Even a parent who's selective about the food choices in the 6 hours a day that the child is with them is up against the wall with these other influences.
We're going to have to close this session now, and maybe during the breaks people can speak to the presenters. And thank you so much for a very interesting session.